Hello, good morning, and welcome to another installment of Let's Talk About COVID-19. I'm Amy Henson, a staff scientist from Science North, and Science North is super excited to partner today with Laurentian University. We're working together to make sure that we're bringing some of the really amazing information, latest research, support information, whatever is out there during this pandemic, so that you can kind of make sense of some of the information that we're receiving, whether it's about health information, personal wellness, whatever it happens to be. So, and I am particularly excited about this topic today because I think out of any of the topics regarding the pandemic, I can't think of one person that I don't know that hasn't experienced some kind of, I don't know, like fear, some kind of anxiety, something that maybe wasn't in their normal idea of how they felt. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the anxiety around the pandemic, but mostly since we've kind of come back together and now we're living in a world where we are together in the middle, where we have this virus going around. What kind of feelings are we having about that? So it's going to be a really interesting discussion today, and I'm super happy to be hosting today. But what I want to do is I want to bring on behalf of Laurentian University, Dr. Céline Larivière. She is the Dean and at the Faculty of Health at Laurentian University, and she's going to give us a welcome from the university. Thank you, Céline. Bonjour.
Good morning. Bonjour. Thank you so much, Amy. Merci beaucoup. Bienvenue, Ani Kwekwe Wache. Gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone to this morning's event. To begin today, we would like to acknowledge the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. We also further recognize that Laurentian University is located on the traditional lands of the Atikameksheng Anishinaabe, and that the greater city of Sudbury also includes the traditional lands of the Wanapitei First Nation. Despite the challenges we're all facing, isn't it incredible how technology has brought us together in a way that we would not have imagined? In my role as the Dean of the Faculty of Health at Laurentian University, I have seen firsthand the engagement and willingness of our exceptionally talented researchers and professors to support the fight against COVID-19. I'll now turn it back to Amy to guide us through the next hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Céline, for joining us. Absolutely. This is, I think, just a really important topic as we're headed, as you know, we've been in, I'll call it, quarantine. We've been in this pandemic since February, March time period, and so much has changed. And I know that change can be scary, and I know that change can be, make people feel uneasy. And every time we turn around, that seems to be changing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today and what we can do to help ourselves during this time. So I'm really excited to bring on two of our speakers today. They are amazing people. We had such a great conversation, sort of pre-conversation before today. So I know today is going to be absolutely wonderful. So we have Zsuzsanna Kerekes. She is a postdoctoral research fellow at Laurentian University Center for Research in Occupational Safety and Health. So welcome, Zsuzsanna. Thank you so much for joining us today. And then we have Lynn Rivet. Hey Lynn, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Lynn is a nurse practitioner and an occupational health and safety nurse as well. And she's also the health and wellness services manager at Laurentian University. So with Lynn as well, we're going to talk a little bit about how Laurentian's been supporting students during this time and some of the things that Lynn's been seeing with our students at Laurentian. So we're going to have a really great conversation around this. So as I was sort of saying in my intro, is that I know sort of these weird feelings that I, have been having during the pandemic. I mean, like there are times when, I'm happy. There are times where I'm really sad and it almost feels like there's no reason for it. I get angry really quickly. So, sometimes those feelings are just a little bit different than what we would normally have. And I can't be alone, right? Like I absolutely can't be alone. And I just feel that there's confusion and fears. And so I'm just trying to figure out like what's happening to me or what's happening to my body. And maybe Shoshana, you could probably start with that.
Sounds good. So you're actually like definitely not alone. Let's start with that, because it's really normal for us in, you know, like a period of time where there are so many changes and we need to like, you know, just deal with so many like new things, or we even like not necessarily know what is going to happen or how like regulations are changing. Then in those situations, very normal to experience sometimes the excitement that comes with those changes, sometimes actually the demands that are coming with those changes. So we are constantly in that phase where like we are figuring out like how to respond, you know, like the best way possible under changing circumstances. So we are using, as you just said, like many words to describe what's going on. Some people would say like, I am like nervous, I am worried. Some people would say like, oh my goodness, like I actually like enjoy like dealing with all those like new things that are happening, and I try to look for like what is actually helping me in those situations. So we are reacting totally differently, but at the end of the day, like our reaction could be like, you know, grouped into two big categories. One is like the biological, physiological part of it, what we are experiencing. So even what you described, like sometimes we realize like, oh my goodness, like I feel like, oh, my face is totally red. Sometimes like, oh, it could be like I am just pale, right? Those physiological reactions are again like normal part of something that we call like stress response. And the stress response is supposed to help us to prepare. So it's kind of like an alert state where we can figure out like how to concentrate more, how to deal with that problem like the best way possible. But originally it served the purpose to prepare us, probably like everyone kind of like is familiar with the expression fight or flight. And that means like a fast response, right? That means that like we are just like, you know, doing what we instinctively think it's the best in that solution. So that's why I'm saying like experiencing those physiological stress responses is so like useful and normal. However, if we are constantly at that state, like it could be exhausted, it could be like, you know, tiring. So we definitely need to figure out like how to deal with that. And the other group of the experiences we call like psychological responses. So that's where we kind of like, you know, some people don't have any appetite. Other people, oh, I could eat like all the time. Some people might have like trouble with sleep. Some people like, no, I am totally fine. That's part of also the psychological response, as well as our emotions, right? The fear, the irritation, the sadness, or sometimes just the excitedness, and sometimes, you know, just being motivated. So we are all reacting totally differently. And if we understand that, we can deal with all the stressors probably way much better.
Oh, I've got some questions for you about that.
Sounds good.
But first, I also want to make sure that we're bringing our audience into this conversation as well, because I think I can't be the only person who has questions about what's going on with me. There has to be somewhere. So within the comment section, the chat section below, whether you're on Facebook or whether you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead. You can put comments in. You can put questions in. I'll receive them. I'll make sure that we ask our guests today. So if you have questions at any time, please feel free to type them in there, and we will get them answered live today. So my first question, Shoshana, is really about this fight and flight response, because I always think of fight and flight as like if I'm being mugged or something, like in a dark alley, like am I going to run away or am I going to deck the guy, right? Like, and so, but in this case, it's a lot different, right? Like it's very different than the actual like physical reaction, right?
So when we are thinking about like the fight or flight reaction, like you are right in the sense that originally our body has been kind of like created literally run away from the source of the stress,
right?
Or literally fight it back, as you just described, right?
Yeah, it's like a literal thing.
Exactly. So, but we are not doing that right now. And most of our like, you know, stressors, most of the things that we are challenged by, they are not so physical that we could run away. So even, you know, like when like our teachers are telling us to do something which is like, like, oh my goodness, I don't know how to start it. Like, we can't run away from the homework. We can't run away from those things. But beyond that, kind of like running away or fighting back, all those reactions that we just described could help us to, like, focus on the problems, right? Or figure out, like, okay, so what do I need to, like, organizing my environment to be able to focus to that problem. And that's kind of like something very, very relevant, even like right now and today. So when we are talking about, I'm just I try to think about, like, COVID related stressors, for example, like, okay, like I might not feel comfortable wearing a mask, right? So it could kind of like create like certain emotions and certain feelings, and it could be unpleasant. Right. But when I understand why I'm doing this, I can kind of like overcome of those feelings. I can like dig into the understanding of why I'm doing this. Okay, like this is something that keeps me actually safe. It makes me like, possible to go to the grocery store. So when I understand that, I can actually like do something with all those thoughts that are coming into my mind. It makes sense like why I feel in a certain way, but I still can make a better decision. And that's also like part of the stress response, that it helps me to figure out like what information I would like to focus on, how I would like to use that, how I would like to deal with that. And it goes back to my, my decisions, like how I do choose like, my health habits. And again, I'm going back to the fact like, okay, like food and nutrition. If I understand that, like how important it is for my body, even though I might not necessarily, feel encouraged to do certain things, I still can make right choices and good choices. So that's how like fight or flight reaction could be very, very relevant. And the major point, basically, I think at the end of the day, that if I understand that fight or flight reaction is very physiological at the sense, I might want to choose activities that I actually do in order to get rid of that internal tension that makes me uncomfortable, right? So meaning I can still go for a walk, I can still do something physical where my body actually gets the relief.
Right. Absolutely. I know that was one way that I was dealing with a lot of that, especially early on where we were really locked down, and I was dealing with a lot of pepped up energy. So that makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to bring it over to Lynn now, because Lynn, I'm curious because you're seeing students come into your clinic, and I'm curious as to what you are seeing as a whole, because you have a different kind of perspective. It's not just your own perspective, right? You're seeing other people come in and their perspective. And what are students at Laurentian right now feeling about the pandemic, and how are they feeling and dealing with things?
Well, we have to look at the societal context. This COVID-19 is truly like an unprecedented event. We have more than 4 billion people who've been put into lockdown in the last year. And this is having like long-lasting effects on people's mental health, obviously. Even for university students in the last, since March, most universities in Canada have transitioned to online platforms. And so it's an adjustment for them to have to deal with their mental health challenges, and also dealing with the COVID-19. For a lot of them, they're dealing with waves of losses. It's like the grieving process. So there's some financial losses, there's some economic losses, there's some hardships financially, as well as loss of friendships. Also, some of them loss of romantic interests while they're attending university, and significant others. For a lot of them, they've been displaced. They've had to go back home, and so sharing space with family members and losing bandwidth and so forth. So that's been cumbersome.
Going also, home back to mom and dad. I feel that.
Which is good, if you want a home cooked meal. But so all those things have caused them to feel a sense of loss, and the reaction is grief. And so some of them are going through the phases of grief. So there's first shock, and then numbness, and then going through anger and blaming, and going through denial. This can't be happening to us. What's going on here? And so they're going through all the different phases at different, everybody at their own pace. And so while they were in university too, a lot of them were getting accommodations for their special needs, and some were accessing counseling services for their mental health issues. And so now that they're back home, there's some limitations there, especially if you're with a family member and you haven't self-disclosed when it comes to your identity and so forth. So it's been a real adjustment for them. And so what we've seen is what other universities have seen. What's interesting is they've undertaken a large studies through the Canadian Universities of College and Universities through Canada with regards to student services. And they've undertook this study this summer, and it was compared to the last previous 2 years. And what they've noted is during the COVID-19 pandemic, that a lot of the students have increased in anxieties. And so that's the first and foremost, general anxieties, and also anxieties related to the pandemic. Second thing was problems with learning issues has gone up, academic issues has gone up, attention and concentration, of course, substance and alcohol abuse, and as well as discrimination. So according to the study, those concerns, presenting student concerns, have increased. So that was interesting, and they've surveyed the 60 universities across Canada, and from 10 different provinces. So it was quite telling. So we're not alone, as Susanna said, and the whole world is going through this pandemic at the same time. Some are doing better than others, and fortunately there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because there is a vaccine that's underway, and they're just looking at procurement at this point in time, distribution, and so we're sitting on the edge of our seat.
Right. I'm really curious, Lynn, do you find that students now, compared to maybe 5 to 10 years ago, are more likely to come seek help when they're having mental health issues, or are they less likely now? I'm curious, like, has the pandemic changed that in any way?
Yes, well, students, as we know, there's been an epidemic of mental health issues amongst our young population, young adults, and they seem to approach the health and wellness services and the counseling services on campus a little bit more readily. I'm just having technical difficulties there. I'm just going to, okay, I've got my, okay, I can't see.
Okay, well, we can still see you, so.
Okay, that's good. It's just my antivirus just went up there.
Yeah, you're still good. We can still see you.
Good.
So that's
they're more readily accessing the mental health and wellness services and the counseling services. They're aware that there's a continuum of mental health, and so at one point you can be healthy, and then you can go down that continuum, and then you can be reactive, and then feel injured, and then get ill. So at different parts of the continuum, they are more likely, maybe initially, if they're feeling well, to go out and exercise with their friends. And as they become a little bit more reactive, they're more likely to seek self-help groups and so forth, or books on how to meditate and mindfulness and yoga. And as they feel injured, they're more likely to seek medical help. and or counseling services. So they're a little bit more knowledgeable. And because of the pandemic, fortunately, we have a lot more mental health online services for students. And so it's just navigating the mental health and healthcare system online. And the Canadian Mental Health Association has been instrumental in helping us with programs such as Bounce Back and White Wall, which is a peer support group, and many other online programs available for youth and young adults and older adults as well.
That's great. That's, and I think that's really encouraging for me, right? Is I think that, as we continue, when we have discussions like this, right? When we have discussions about mental health and wellness, I think it opens up those doors for people, right? It's nice to know, like, that feeling that, okay, I'm not alone in this, and I can't be the only one, and I'm not, right? And so, and if you need those services, then it's extremely important to access them, for sure. So I think these types of conversations are incredibly important to keep out there and keep going. We do have a question coming in, and it revolves around this idea of feeling safe, and I sort of I kind of want to touch on this a little bit, because I think part of, sometimes the uneasiness of people is this idea of, well, I don't necessarily feel safe to do this and that, right? And I'm just trying to figure out what is kind of that idea of, and maybe, I don't know, Shoshana, if that's your question or not, but how do I kind of grab a hold of this idea that if I'm following like the health guidelines, because the health guidelines are out there, they are excellent guidelines. How do I still make myself feel like safe in this kind of environment?
Okay. So when we are talking about like feeling, for example, safe, I usually try to kind of like answer like, if we are good detectives in our own life in general, that might help us to kind of like, filter out all those things what we need and what we don't need. And I use the word detectives because we are looking for the evidence, okay? Right. Like a real detective.
I like that. Okay.
Okay. So when we are following guidelines that public health tells us, public health announces guidelines based on like results and evidence and research, and what we are kind of like getting through them, that's information that was tested out there, right? They are not just coming up with an idea like, oh, this is what I think today. No, like they are summarizing, and that's what they are doing all the time for us. They are summarizing all the research out there. The scientists are doing like amazing job to provide us with the best information possible. And if there is a change in that knowledge, again, like they are communicating that change to us immediately. So we don't need to kind of like, do that search all the time for us. And they are really good detectives in that sense as well, right? So when we are like going for feeling, comfortable or safety, if we are doing and making changes or decisions based on evidence, then we are definitely on the right pathway. And there is also like a reason where those measures are usually like more cautious, like also building in a buffer for things that we don't know yet, right? And they are also telling us those things. So if we are following guidelines, at that knowledge at the time, that's the best advice that we can get. The feeling of safety might not necessarily still come just because of that, right? And it also like our perception, like how we perceive, like how the other person is also following those guidelines, how I perceive my own behavior. So there is a lot of kind of like extra emotion, belief added to those factors. And like some people still might refuse to go like, out there saying that because I don't feel safe. And that's totally okay, because we might have like, extra personal worries. But again, I'm going back to the detective work. If you can identify what your question is, that's your first step to figure out like how can you, again, like change your feelings about that situation and make you more comfortable in that situation.
Right. Yeah. it's one of those things that I think there's, public health is putting out those guidelines, and I think people question them one way or the other. But I love what you said; they're based right on research, and they have a built-in buffer system, which I was like, oh, I didn't think of that before. Right? Of course, they would have a built-in buffer system, right? To be just a little bit safer than maybe what's minimally required. So that makes a lot of sense to be preventative, right? So I think that's an incredibly good point. I'm just reminding our audience that if you do have any questions or comments, please put them into the discussion below, whether you're watching on YouTube or whether you're watching on Facebook. You can write them just down below right there, and we will get them to you. That was a really great question. So I love this idea of safety. Lynn, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, as Susanna mentioned, the public health is the lead during this health crisis. So they are the ones that are responsible to contain this virus, contain this pandemic. And so they do the investigation, as Susanna indicated. They test, they trace, and they treat. So they isolate or they quarantine people, as well as they mitigate preventative strategies. So they put these specific guidelines in place for us to follow. So stick to your own household at this point in time. Wear a mask and keep your 6 feet or 2 meters from individuals. And so these are skills and tools that we can acquire to protect ourselves. So we should feel safe if we're abiding by the rules and regulations from the public health. And also we have to look at what's going on in our community. What's the level of transmission? How many cases are there in our community? Here in Sudbury, I think this morning it's 9 active cases here in Sudbury. So everybody seems to be, adhering to the public health guidelines and following the health and safety protocols from their workplaces. And young people in elementary schools are able to attend school, and they're wearing their masks and keeping their distances and following. They're doing well as well. So as long as everybody keeps doing their part as a collective, we will get there, and we should come out at the other end.
Right, absolutely. So I kind of want to move this discussion into this idea of I haven't quite decided whether I like this word or I don't like this word yet. I'm on the fence. I don't know, this idea of our new normal, right? And because I like it and I don't like it, because it to me is a little, it's kind of like this urge inside of me kind of wants to go back to my old normal, but I know that that's not possible, and I'm not really even quite sure what this new normal is going to evolve to be over time, right? And one of the things though is that I also see it as this sort of destination, right? It's this far off kind of destination, and I don't know how long normal is going to be or when it's going to come, and I feel like sort of unsure, I guess is the right word, about how that's all going to be and when is it going to come. So I guess sort of when we're in this period of waiting, what are some of the things that we can do to kind of help us get through this kind of question, like through this time? I don't know who to answer that, but
So there are actually I think a lot of layer of your questions, because if we talk about this new normal, this is in the process of kind of figuring out what is going to be, and we don't have an answer, because this is still ongoing process. We are still changing, but it would be probably unrealistic to expect that we are going back to something that was before, because we have learned just so many new things, right? So we have actually experienced so many new things that some of them probably it's really, really worth for us to keep in the long-term run. So even what we are doing right now. So doing those online meetings and gathering, and I think it's just amazing since March, how much our technology and the education system has changed, and it has a lot of positive effects that probably we would like to keep. It won't work for everyone in the same way, which is also totally okay. But if we kind of like just have choices and we can figure out like what we would like to keep, what we would not want to keep, it still gives us like some type of a control, right? And you know, like I'm just also thinking like, you know, working remotely, like before pandemic, you know, a lot of people had this belief that working remotely would mean that the person is not taking the job seriously and would perform at the same level. And the pandemic kind of like showed us that no, like those beliefs are not true. Like actually some people perform way much better, more effective, like happier in that situation. Other people dislike it and really can't wait to go back to work. But again, like both ways are like understandable, important, and in our future choices, we need to figure out like how can we apply this new knowledge again like the best way possible, to make decision that could potentially be comfortable for so many people, right? Or even like, you know, we are in Sudbury, we kind of like always count like as a northern rural community, and you know, again, like our healthcare just kind of like got this push to like improve a lot, and way much more like telehealth services are available than it was before, and we just kind of like made the system better. So again, probably we would like to keep those changes, right? Or we just learn like new skills. Like we definitely did learn how to wash our hands properly that we didn't know before. Again, probably this is something that we would like to keep, right? So the new normal will definitely contain those things. And I think that's kind of like very, very important at the end of the day. And we need to reflect on that knowledge.
Absolutely. Lynn, did you have something to add to that?
Well, yeah, I think as Susanna mentioned, we have different reactions to the pandemic, and some of us fight, some of us flight, and some of us freeze too. And it's okay. And, you know, validate your feeling. It's okay. There's not a wrong reaction. There's not a right reaction, but it's okay to say, well, this is how the pandemic makes me feel. But then you have to move from there and then implement some healthy lifestyle changes, whether that's looking after yourself. So some self-care measures, making sure that you're physically active. We're supposed to have at least 150 minutes of physical activity per week. So incorporate that in our daily or weekly schedule. It's important to look after our mental health. So whether that's through meditations, through mindfulness, or through yoga to relax. Also, as Susanna mentioned, it's very important to eat well. We are what we eat, and it's very important to eat breakfast. You know, you're breaking a fast, and so eating the recommended fruits and vegetables daily. Also very important to get some sleep. You know, when you go to bed and you get a good night's rest, then you recover. And so it's important to take those naps too if you need to rest during the day. And so having that work-life balance, or if you're a student, you have to incorporate some healthy habits, and so avoiding smoking and not drinking excessively. For women, it's 2 drinks per day or 10 drinks per week, and men, it's 3 drinks a day, and not more than 15 per week, and not more than 3 on one occasion. For men and women.
All of those good health habits, right? I was like I was laughing when you said naps, because honestly, during the first part of the pandemic, I think my body, when it does exhibit stress, the first thing that I would do at like 1:30 in the afternoon is like, I need a 20-minute nap. Like I need.
Yes, and it's important, Amy, to listen to your body.
Yeah, those small strategies, and then I'd wake up in 20 minutes, and be like, okay, I'm good. Like, right, we can keep on going, and those strategies are so important. We just had a question come in, and they're interested about talking about strategies. They're interested about the strategies that workplaces can take to incorporate, because so at Science North, we're open 2 days a week. Currently, we're not open the 7 days a week like we normally are. Most of our staff are being encouraged to work from home unless they have to be at the Science Center, especially if you're working the weekends, right, to have fun with our visitors. But we're being encouraged to work from home. But I know that there are workplaces where we are, moving back to eventually, coming back to work together. And workplaces have to plan this out. And how can workplaces help their workers feel comfortable, feel less fearful, less anxious in this kind of new transition, do you think?
So I think one of the major points will be communication, right? Mm-hmm. So like offering the right information, also explaining like why we are doing this, like what is the rationale behind that, like, that could help people, again, like just have a different reaction, and understanding is always like a good baseline. Mm-hmm. It's like a little bit difficult to give like general advice because different workplaces could implement like definitely different strategies based on also like what they are doing, how many people works there. So like we need to like always calculate those things into this process. But what I find like as a general guideline, very important, like do it gradually, right? So if we are doing everything gradually, we give time, not just for the adjustment process, but also to see like how those changes are working out, we might be able to react better, because we need to also monitor the needs of our coworkers and colleagues. And if the people is like, if the workplace also like works with clients, that also like very important, like how clients are responding to those changes. So if we are taking everything like gradually, and we also understand that this is like a very important part of the returning back to the new normal, then we might be also like, again, in the safe side. And going back, like public health, definitely like guidelines are kind of like very straightforward, very understandable, but like how that could be translated in that unique situation what the workplace has, that is always like, like a lot of conversation, a lot of decision, and we kind of like need to figure out like how patient we can be potentially with those changes, right? Mm-hmm. So like, again, that's why gradual return is so important. And I think it might be also interesting to also kind of like realize how the new experiences will fit into that workplace and their environment, right? So like telecommuting, working from home, it's like a crucial question, and probably there will be like a lot of conversation at most workplaces, like how can we kind of like keep happy those who enjoyed working from home, and how can we keep happy those who actually disliked, like this situation, and create a good mixture, because we would like to also have this feeling of like we are a team here. Yeah. And the funny thing is like there are like actually like decades of studies going back saying that, again, dependent on the workplace, on the person, and a lot of needs, usually people are doing actually pretty well with, like telecommuting for a couple of days a week, and like being at the office for a couple of days a week. And if, like Silicon Valley is something that we kind of like usually get back to when it's about like those new policies, but this isn't like a policy that, like they have been implemented first, and it was working really well for them. Mm-hmm. But can we say like this is like a general recipe for every workplace? No. No.
You can't keep a restaurant open if you're working from home. That is a challenge.
Not really, right? So that's why I'm saying we need to kind of like just consider that. But I'm pretty sure that we will kind of like, come up with like a lot of creative and good solutions.
Right. Absolutely.
Most workplaces have implemented health and safety protocols as per public health guidelines. And so most have mandatory screening in the workplace. So they're doing active screening upon entering.
Yeah, I know. I have to do that when I go to work. So
exactly. And most employees are aware that they cannot come into work when they're ill. So I think we get the message, and it's not a good idea to travel from an area of high rates of transmission or burden of illness to an area where there's minimal cases. So to take that into consideration as well. And so all these protocols that are been put in place is to protect the employees in the workplace. So a lot of workplaces have really reduced their footprint, and they've de-densified, and so they reduce the risk considerably to their workers. And many of the workers are working with their masks on because those are the recommendations. All day I see somebody's asking about mask, and the preferred mask is one that's got 3 layers, and it's got cotton on the outside. In the middle, it's woven propylene, it's called, or a filter. And so it should be 3-ply with some cotton, tightly woven, and non-woven propylene or a filter in the middle. And so most people are wearing their masks. Well, they have to in a public space, keeping their 6 meters, and abiding by all the policies that have been put in place during this pandemic. And now we even have a framework, as you're aware, and we're here in Sudbury. We're under the Protect section, where we have straightened measures with the number of people that are allowed in a social setting or in a public setting or at a wedding and a funeral. So there seems to be lots of guidelines, but it's to communicate those to your employees on a regular basis, and to have those town hall meetings, or to have those online chats and these types of platforms to communicate those messages.
Absolutely. I'm looking around our screen right now, and I'm at home. Shoshana's at home, but Lynn, you're at work, which is you're in the office, and and I found this so interesting because I've been, and working at Science North, I've been working from home when we were closed, and then, I'd go in when we were open, working throughout the summer on weekends. And then, but Lynn, you've been there since March. You haven't left.
No, I haven't left since the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah. And so this is, I kind of see this as 2 different sides too, right? Because there's the sort of the side of, let's somebody like myself or Shoshana, like going back to work, and what does this new workplace look like? But also like some of my colleagues who have been working just like you, Lynn, throughout the entire pandemic at the Science Center to do the absolutely essential things that our Science Center needs, like animal care and things like that. They've also experienced sort of these fears of what happens when everybody comes back, right? Because I've been here kind of alone, and what are they bringing with them? So there's always this sort of 2 sides when you're looking at the workplace, right? Who's been gone and who's been back. So I know that it can be a super big challenge for workplaces to sort of how to feel that out. But I love the suggestion of bringing it in slowly, and open communication and being honest. And I think that's and following our guidelines, of course. Absolutely. So we have now I don't think we can have this discussion today without talking about, it is December. Winter holidays are coming upon us, right? We're going to have people, especially like our university community, right? You'll be leaving to go home. A lot of students will be going home. Many students may not be able to head home. And that is also a reality as well, right? Where if they're from far away and they're not able to travel, or, for whatever reason, they're staying here. There's always a little bit of fear and uneasiness around this holiday season. I sort of think, we know what our plan is as a family, what we're going to do. We're keeping it, very, very tight within our own household. But, I know that there are people out there who are not going to do that. And to me, that makes me really, really nervous. And so I'm sort of trying to figure out how can we kind of balance this idea of the holidays and the fears and anxieties that are going to be coming up in the next few weeks around that.
There is definitely a lot of worries, right? And again, like, hopefully this worry makes us understand, like, what is our priority and what is the most important thing when we are making those decisions. Because and it kind of like relates to, like, there was a question about, like, getting together and the social support, what we need. Like, probably that's the biggest challenge for us as human beings in this pandemic, that we are cut off from our social support system, meaning we can't meet with our friends, we can't meet with our family members. And we are kind of like, again, just created in a way that that's what we need the most. Like that's our like emotional fuel to like go through everything. And that's the baseline, most of the coping strategies that we have that social support. And we need to like turn this social support into like something that is definitely not as efficient, like as receiving it in person, but it's still something, right? And again, like how can we keep our family members safe? Like again, there are some guidelines that we can follow. There is a reason why we usually have a recommendation. Okay, if you think that it's really, really important because your family member might be at that age that you don't think that like you will kind of like meet again, this is like a very difficult decision to make, right? Because you don't want to be the cause and the reason why they are getting ill, right? And who can deal with that responsibility? Obviously, we don't want to deal with that responsibility, but we might also be suffering emotionally, like not being able to go there. So most of the time, it's really important to kind of like, talk through those issues and see like, okay, this is my priority, but what that other person's priority in my family, right? How they are able to like also deal with the risk, and what are the solutions that we still can, like agree, again, following the guidelines, meaning we can make the decision that like prior to travel, I am isolating myself already and I take that time, right? So like the 2 weeks before I am visiting my parents or grandparents, and I'm taking it very seriously. And I am also like, going through like testing to make it sure that when I arrive there. So like there are precautions that we can consider. Some people would say like, I might not be able to do that. And then probably it doesn't matter like how heartbreaking is, you need to consider like the safety might be more important than that, like need that you would like to see your family members in person. So if you're asking me like, is there like a straightforward answer? No, not really. But again, like considering like all those factors, we can figure out like what makes us more comfortable, more relaxed about our decision. Or if sometimes even we understand that, like my parents, my grandparents are also like, okay, and they do understand.
Yeah.
Or if I would go there, they would be just so scared and fearful, and I don't want to do that, right? So if we don't talk about those, like factors and viewpoints, we won't know. We can't necessarily like make those decisions on our own. But again, I know it's kind of like sounds like repetitive, but there is a reason why we have safety guidelines. There is a reason why we are saying like, please, if it's not necessarily, try not to like, do something that could be potentially dangerous. And again, I'm just going back to like how Sudbury, experienced like increase in cases. If you see after Halloween, like in the next 2 weeks, we had the highest peak.
Yeah.
Right. And after then, we kind of like went back to our more normal, like new cases number, because that definitely influenced like what we could experience. So I think that's kind of like very important to think about at the end of the day.
There's a lot of balance there, isn't there? Yeah. And there's also a lot of balance is that what might be good for your family and for yourself may not be very good for somebody else, right? And a little bit, I always say a little bit of understanding to other people and what decisions that they're making as well, right?
More planning for Christmas than ever before this year, and following our medical officer of health guidelines as well. And at this point, you're saying to stick to the household, but yes, we should look at our own situation and assess the risks.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to, I don't think I see any more questions coming in, but I have one final question for both of you. And I'd really like to know is that if you could offer our watchers today one piece of advice about how to help themselves during this time through their mental health and well-being, what one piece of advice would you offer that so people can take care of their own mental health?
We mentioned a lot of health habits, and I was grateful that Lynn went into like, you know, great details because they are just like amazingly important. But if I look like at one thing that could kind of like potentially boost everything, like it's probably physical exercise. It's probably the physical exercise, because if we are kind of like doing that, it addresses most of the physiological stress response, and our body is able to deal with that. If we can do that, we usually end up like, you know, sleeping better. If we are sleeping better, then we are probably like, you know, more focused the next day, and our feelings are also like more under control. So that is kind of like a really good start point in that kind of like chain of activities and outcomes, where like physical activity would have a direct or indirect positive boost when it's about like dealing with the stressors that we are experiencing. And especially when we kind of like have this feeling of like, oh, I can't move, like I'm just so tired and exhausted. If we can understand that as an indication that like probably that's the time when we need the most the physical activity, and make that decision for ourselves, because that means that our body is really exhausted fighting back the stress response. So that boost is really, really needed. So physical exercise, please, please.
And Lynn?
Well, it's along the same lines, but I would give a prescription for nature therapy. Get out there, you know, out in the country, or go listen to the waves of the lake or the ocean, or, you know, go for a walk in the park. I know in the wintertime it's maybe a little bit more treacherous, but get the skis out, or the snowshoes, the nice small snowshoes now, or when the lake is ready on Ramsey Lake, go skating on the lake, but listen to the sounds of nature, you know, listen to the rustles of the leaves, or the running waters, and just stop those negative thoughts, and just listen to it's therapeutic to listen to the sounds of nature and Mother Earth.
And we live, I think, at least in Sudbury and in Northern Ontario, we live in the best environment for that, don't we?
Yeah.
Well, this has been such an interesting talk today. I want to thank both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. I will say, though, I don't think we can leave this conversation with saying to our audience today, if you are experiencing mental health problems in any way whatsoever, please seek out support. You can find support at your school. Obviously, Laurentian University has support mechanisms in place. If it is an emergency, you call 911. And there is also a 211 number in Ontario that is available for you to access mental health services, and they will help connect you to mental health services in your community. So if you do feel like you need any of those resources, please reach out, because there are people out there who are there to help. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to just do a little plug for our next adventure into Let's Talk About COVID-19, which is happening next week on December the 9th. We're going to be having two separate sessions, and it's going to be a really great talk about the vaccine. And so I know everybody will want to tune in for that. It's the big topic of conversation. I know I have my flu vaccine shot scheduled for next week, so I'll have a sore arm all ready to go for the vaccine talk. But I hope you will join us again on December the 9th. We'll be talking about, is the vaccine our way out of this pandemic? And it's sure to be a really great one. So thank you very much from Laurentian University and Science North, and thank you for joining us today.
Bye-bye. Bye.